Daniel 1 and verse 7. Remember the first part of Daniel, and remember the first chapter of Daniel is really the background to get us ready for what we see in chapter 2 through chapter 12. And so we saw that some Hebrew boys had been taken, and these were not the only Hebrew boys, the four that are mentioned. Remember, the context shows us that there were others that were taken too, but there appear to be the only four that remained faithful to God out of those that went to this special school, whatever you want to call it. I would call it probably, in our terminology today, graduate school. These were well-educated people. Remember, they went through education much faster than we do today because their lifespans were shorter. And so they got all of this as quickly as they could. But this was a special school. And so it would probably be what we consider like graduate program. That brings us to verse 7. Now among these were the children of Judah, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Ashpenaz, the prince of the eunuchs, the man in charge, gave these four Hebrews names which honored the gods of Babylon. This was not an uncommon thing. We're going to talk about that just a little bit, but this was not an uncommon thing to rename people in those times after some deity that you worshiped when they were taken captive. Daniel is going to be given the name Belteshazzar. Now, I want us to notice in verse 7 the definitions of their Hebrew names, or rather, no, their Babylonian names that they were given. Belteshazzar means Lord of the straitened treasure. And Bel, Lord. Bel was a key god among many of the ancients. Protect him or his life. Shadrach was Hananiah, and it means royal or the great scribe. And it is more like what their names would mean in the Hebrew. It says, I am fearful of God. Meshach, the guest of God, a guest of a king, rather, who is like Aku. Aku, again, was one of these gods that the Babylonians served, and Baker Carpenter tells us who is Aku. And so they almost, it's like kind of like what we see in the book of Acts when the people attributed Barnabas and Paul as being gods, their gods, Greek gods of the people. And Abednego, did I get that wrong? Abednego, man, I'm seeing things here. The servant of Nebo. And again, Nebo was one of the gods of the Babylonians. It was a general practice, as we mentioned earlier, to rename hostages in order to remove them from their roots. There was a purpose in it. It wasn't just to give them the names of gods or to honor their gods. That was part of it. But also, this is an attempt in young minds to remove them as quickly as they can, if possible, from their roots. The majority of times, Daniel's Hebrew name is used in this book. That's interesting because, generally speaking, when we look at the names of his three friends, their Babylonian names are given or usually mentioned in the book, except when Daniel uses their names, when Daniel speaks about them. So Daniel is only used their Hebrew names And why did Daniel, think about this, he has objected to eating the food of the king. Why did Daniel not object to being given a name that honored a pagan god? Have you ever thought about it? I mean, he objected to eating the king's meat. Why? Because that food that the king ate, a lot of it was going to be food that he couldn't eat because God had said, do not eat. If you eat, you defile yourself. You make yourself unclean in the eyes of God. Mosier made this comment, and I agree with him on this. He said, it did not matter what they called Daniel, because they called him a name which would be defamatory, did not make him that kind of person. Daniel objected to what was important, that which would defile him, but did not make a big deal out of what was not important. What was Mosier's point? What they called him didn't cause him to be unclean. No big deal. He may not have liked it, but what control would he have over what they called him? They're going to call him that no matter what. What about the enemies of God's people all down through the ages? You know, in the 1st and 2nd centuries, they called God's people cannibals. Did that make them cannibals? You might not like being called a cannibal when you're not a cannibal, but what difference does it make? It doesn't make you unfaithful to God, but disobeying God's commands, that does make a person unclean. That does put him in rebellion to God. So rather than causing unnecessary disturbances and turmoil, let those things go that don't matter, that don't have anything to do with our soul's eternity. But what do we tend to do as human beings? People call us something we don't like. Oh boy, our back gets big and straight and we stand up as tall as we can and we're going to argue. And what does that cause? Nothing but hard feelings. So there's some point to what he's saying. King made the same point, and I want to read what King said. It's very similar to what Mosier said. But I wanted to emphasize the point. These young Jews had no choice what the Babylonians chose to call them any more than we today have a choice as to the various terms selected by our enemies to describe us. They simply had to learn to live with those names. The new names given to Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah made no difference at all as regards their inner character. Daniel and his 3 friends were not changed into idolaters because they were given these fancy new Mesopotamian names by those who had power over them to do so. I remember in junior high school, that's dating me, they don't call it junior high school anymore. That was 7th, 8th, and 9th grade for those who may not know. I had a math teacher that called me Bobbert. And he called me Bobbert because I was always asking questions. Why is it that way? Why do you do it that way? You know, blah, blah, blah. I always wanted to know why. And so he got where he started calling me Bobbert. I'd raise my hand. All right, Bobbert. What difference does it make in the grand scheme of things? Let's look at verse 8. But Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with a portion of the king's meat, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested of the prince of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself. Daniel purposed in his heart. This is the key to faithfulness. What we determine in our heart. The word purpose is a verb that shows that Daniel had determined something. He'd purposed something. He'd set his mind to do something, or in this case, not to do something, or made something to be that's primary importance to him. This is what I'm going to do Why? Because it's of primary importance. Well, where did he appoint that he should not defile himself to be of primary importance? And the reason I point this out is because of the word heart. In his heart. People today say, oh, I wouldn't trade this feeling I have in my heart for any. Wait a minute. Hearts don't have feelings. Minds have feelings. Our minds is where we generate feelings. You see why I'm pointing that out? In his heart, his mind, the seat of the soul. Isn't it interesting that the Bible describes death as a separation of our body and soul? And scientifically, we know that what? The last thing to die in our body is our brain. Isn't that interesting? Heart, labe, the inner man, the mind. That's the word heart in this text. The inner mind, the will. You know, this old heart can't determine anything. It can't give me the strength and the power to decide that I'm going to excel in some area. It's our understanding. All of these words are generated in the word that's interpreted heart in our English, labe. This shows a determination. He had made a decision. He had made an internal vow. Vow. Oh, we shouldn't make vows. Really? Think about that for a moment. If someone asked you to do something and you say, yes, I'm going to do it, what have you done? That's exactly the same thing as a vow. You've made a promise that you're going to do something. And if you don't mean it, you broke your vow. You broke your intent. Maybe you didn't have any intention to do it in the first place. This shows a determination. He made a decision. I am going to do my best not to defile myself in the eyes of my God. What was so important that he made this vow? The defiling. Strong tells us that this word means to soil. I remember a preacher many, many years ago when I was, I believe, a preteen. No, I was in junior high school. There was a preacher that came and held a meeting for us, and he was talking about sin. And the first night of the lesson, as he got into it, he held up one of those 3x5 sheets of real brilliant white paper. What are they called? Poster board. And it was just as white and clean as it could be. And as he went on, he said, you know, when we sin, that kind of dirties things up. And then he held up another one and it had one little black ink spot on it. And as he went on, he eventually held up more and more until there was all kinds of black splotches all over that previously clean, pure whiteboard. And then, of course, his punchline, so to speak, was the invitation. You can make your life all clean again, just like this. And he held up that original poster board. Made a good impression. I never forgot that lesson. I don't guess I ever will. This word, defile, this particular word, ga'al, that is translated defile, means to soil, to desecrate something, to stain it, to pollute it, to make it impure. And that's what we do when we sin and we don't repent of that sin and ask for God's forgiveness. We defile, we make our soul impure, we make it dirty, we pollute it. Notice the emphasis. Daniel was determined that he would keep himself, including his thinking, not just his physical body, but his mental body, pure and unpolluted from anything that would defile him in the eyes of God. Do we ask ourselves a question here? Are we keeping our inner man clean and pure in the sight of God? In this particular case, what would have defiled Daniel in God's eyes? The portion of the king's meat, or the wine that he drank. I believe we noticed last week this word wine. There's a generic word that means wine. In the Greek, this word would not have been would have been translated oinos. The Greek word oinos is a generic term. It can mean the grape juice, or the grape that's still on the vine before it's ever been plucked, or the grape that's just been plucked and that little teeny drop of liquid that comes out of it, or mashed up, or something that is alcoholic in content. This particular word, though, in the Hebrew cannot mean anything except an intoxicating beverage. The Hebrews had another word that was different, that meant an unintoxicating beverage or drink. So you've got an intoxicating beverage, and the Babylonian kings wouldn't have hesitated to eat a good old barbecue sandwich if they had sandwiches. They wouldn't have hesitated to eat some good old catfish. But those things couldn't be eaten by a Hebrew under the law of Moses if they wanted to remain pure and undefiled before God. God determined what kind of food the Hebrews could eat. They didn't have a choice in this, not if they wanted to please God. And that meant that they couldn't eat of the king's dainties. The word meat here is a word that is translated dainties and just the best of the best, or the alcoholic beverages. And the same choices must always be made even today. There are certain foods that we're not supposed to eat. Now, in flesh, all flesh now is for Christians, but it's just like any other drug. Alcohol, a drug, is not to be consumed. Why? Because it messes with the mind. It makes us where we don't think properly. We do things. We'll end up doing things because the very first thing that an alcoholic beverage does is knock out the control center of the brain. And that's why you read about people at college parties where they get up and dance on tables and act fools and do things. And even people that have been arrested for robbery and murder sometimes don't realize they did it because they had been drinking alcohol. So we have the same choices today. There are some things that we can do or think that defile us. Daniel said, I'm not going to defile myself. I am determined. Now, does that mean he never sinned? No, we know better than that. He was a human being. Even though he was greatly loved, as we'll notice later on in the book of Daniel, greatly loved by God, no human being is perfect unless they haven't reached the age of accountability, whatever that age is. The same choices today are like they were then. Either please the king or please God. But in this case, you can't do both. It's please God and anger the king. Can't have it both ways. What would Daniel do about this situation? Well, he requested. He asked. He was polite. He asked the prince of the eunuchs, I don't want to defile myself. Can we not do what would defile us? Notice he requested. He didn't demand. He didn't protest. He didn't make up a sign and said, I want pulse. I want pulse. No. He didn't cause a riot because they were wanting him to do something that he didn't want to do. The laws today in the Christian dispensation are not the same as they were for the Hebrews. Most of the food that, as far as flesh is concerned, that they were not allowed to eat, we can eat whatever we want. If you want to take a chance, you can eat one of those puffer fish too. You know, if they're not fixed just right, the person who eats them is going to die. There's no way around it. But it still takes the same kind of loyalty that Daniel showed to keep ourselves pure, to keep ourselves undefiled, to keep ourselves clean in the eyes of God. Where did Daniel learn to be so steadfast? Now, we don't have a scripture that says, this is where he learned to be so steadfast in loyalty to God. But no doubt it took godly parents, I would assume, wouldn't you? Or the influence of somebody who was very godly. It could have been a grandmother, grandfather, or it could have been somebody he came in contact with. But when I look into the scriptures, what did it take to make a John the Immerser, otherwise known as the Baptist? Zacharias and Elizabeth. Look at what the scriptures say about them. They were both righteous before God. What does righteous mean? They did right. They both did right before God. Again, not perfect. No human being is. What did it take to make a Timothy? Unfeigned faith that is in thee, Timothy, which dwelt first in thy grandmother Lois and thy mother Eunice. Godly influence by relatives. I would assume Daniel was probably in the same position. And if not a relative, then at least somebody he came in contact with that really influenced him. You know, it could have been like old Samuel. It's always interested me that Samuel was promised by his mother to God that she would deliver him to be a great man of God for the training. And it's always interested me that Eli wasn't such a good father with his own sons. His sons were evil. Because of his sons, Israel suffered a tremendous defeat. But he did a good job with Samuel, apparently. That's always interested me. Consider a couple of secular quotes, because I think they help us think about something here. Frank Lloyd Wright, one of the greatest architects that's ever been. His houses are still, and buildings that he's built are still unbelievable in our time. He said, I know the price of success, hard work, unremitting devotion to the things you want to see happen. And now let's put that in a spiritual context. Do I want, beyond anything else, to be in heaven someday with God? Do I think that I can go to heaven by just being lackadaisical about studies? About my Christian life? That, you know, I can just half-heartedly do it and make it to heaven? Unremitting devotion, hard work. Doesn't it take hard work to overcome sin? A sin that is in our lives, a sin that maybe we really liked, doing that thing? A quote by Vince Lombardi, one of the greatest football coaches that's ever existed. He said, a man can be as great as he wants to be. Notice that. If you are willing to sacrifice the little things in life and pay the price for the things that are worthwhile, it can be done. Now, again, there's a secular approach. He was talking about football. You want to be the greatest quarterback there ever was? You're going to have to make a lot of sacrifices. You know, I get kind of amused at people I talk to sometimes. They act like men like Michael Jordan and well, whoever you want to name in sports. It just comes natural. Oh, they have such natural ability. Well, they can have all the natural ability they want. But if you'll study those who become truly great athletes, you'll see that they put in hours and hours of extra work. They give up things that they normally would love. I'd love to go out with people and eat, but I need to practice this. And they have to put in hours and hours that nobody sees. When the gym has been closed, basically, they're the ones that will go in at night and flick the lights on and shoot baskets for 3 or 4 hours, or throw footballs for 3 or 4 hours. Yeah, they do. That's how they become great. So you see how in secular affairs, men can be very wise. What about in spiritual affairs? Are we as wise? Are we willing to make the sacrifices that or do we want to go along with the crowd and enjoy these other things so much that we're not willing to make the sacrifice that it's going to take? Like a Daniel. Oh, that food would have probably been really good. Taste good. It'll defile me before God. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to eat it. Look at verse 9. Now God had brought Daniel into favor and tender love with the prince of the eunuchs. This, to me, looks very much like providence. How was it that Daniel was brought into favor, into tender care of this prince of the eunuchs? Seems obvious to me that God is involved in this, and let's suggest that Daniel had something to do with this too. God doesn't do everything for us. If He did, we'd have pure, clean lives. Our souls would be just as clear and plain or clean as when we were born. I have a part. You have a part. Daniel had a part. What if Daniel had acted like a normal captive? Well, how would a normal captive act? Well, let's think about it. Ask yourself, how would you have acted if you had been made a slave? And that's what Daniel had been made. We can dress it up in gentle terms all we want to, but the fact of the matter is he had been made a slave. He didn't have any choice in what he's going to do, where he's going to live, even the food. He had to ask permission. I don't want to eat that food. Let's do a test. Ask yourself how you would have acted if you had lived a life of prominence. Oh, remember, these boys were from the king's families, we'll see later on in the book of Daniel. You were royalty in your home, and you were taken and made a slave by a foreign power. Kind of hard for us to imagine, isn't it? Daniel and his 3 friends had been part of the highest echelons of their home country. Would it be that they would have been tempted if they were normal fellas, to be defiant, to resist, to act ugly toward their captors, these prince of the eunuchs? Or would they act like someone who obviously considered it to be an opportunity to glorify God by the way they acted? I don't like the situation I'm in. I don't like being a slave. I don't like all of that goes along with this. But there's no indication that Daniel or his three friends rebelled in any way. They didn't show disrespect to their captors. In other words, they didn't just give them eye service and then when they turned their back, go, or yeah, or whatever. He offered them the best of their service. They clearly wanted to be the best that they could be, even though they were in a horrible situation. And really, their situation wasn't quite as bad as the others, but still, a slave? You're told what to do, where to go, when to do it, and et cetera, et cetera. His actions to seek to do the best, to do the right thing, obviously had an effect on his captors. You know, it's very possible that their captors would have taken them in thinking they're going to run the first chance they get. They're going to try to escape. They're going to try to undermine. They're going to try to sabotage. We're going to have to break their will. They're going to have to break them down to the point where they will do whatever we say, even if we told them to jump in a fire. Make them productive servants. Remember also that the same God who caused Daniel to have favor with his captives is the same God who gave Jehoiakim, the king of Judah, into the hand of Nebuchadnezzar. Throughout this book, the sovereignty of God is seen. How do we react in a bad situation? Whether it be at work or in sports or whatever. How do we react when people treat us badly? Do we give honor to God? Do we cause people to look at us in the way we act and think, yeah, that's all Christians are like that, bunch of bums? Or do we bring honor to God by saying, you know, there's something about these folks. They didn't react the way I thought they were going to react. They didn't act as mean and ugly as we're being to them. What's up with these people? Nebuchadnezzar's army, remember, didn't give him the victory. God did. God wanted these people punished because they had delved into idolatry and witchcraft and all of these other things, as we saw earlier. No man by his own works, including Daniel, caused the prince of eunuchs to give Daniel favor. But I believe Daniel had a part in it. He obeyed God, didn't he? And wouldn't the obedience to his God cause him to act in a good way that would cause his captors to treat him differently than those who rebelled and sabotaged and all these other things? I don't know what I did, but Jenny probably got my computer and did this. It's got to be her. Let's look at verse 10. And the prince of the eunuchs said unto Daniel, I fear my lord the king, who hath appointed your meat and your drink. For why should he see your faces worse liking than children which are of your sort? Notice that word, sort. Then shall ye make me endanger my head to the king. Daniel and his friends, they wanted different food. Because if they ate the king's food, drank his wine, they would defile themselves in God's eyes. And the prince of eunuchs, we can understand him, can't we? If you had the charge that you take good care of these fellows, and part of the good care is I'm going to make sure they get the best of my food, and you took that food away from them, I think we can understand the eunuch. He probably believed that there was no finer food. Can you imagine Daniel, when he made this request, how he might have been thinking? Oh, wait, why would you want vegetables and water instead of this wonderful food that the king's willing to give you? Might we not think that way if we were him? I'm assuming that when they asked for this other food, that's exactly the way he felt. And he had to have thought, this pulse in water, it's not going to make them better. It's going to make them worse. They're not going to be as healthy. They're not going to look as good. Their complexion just won't be as good. Why would anyone prefer pulse over beef and pork and shrimp and lobster and all the dainties, all this wonderful food from the king's table? Consider that word sort for a moment. Some might consider this a derogatory term. Like today, people will say, what, your people, or your circle. It's not a put down. Today, people ought to avoid those terms, your people. We're all God's people. It doesn't matter what color our skin is. But I've noticed something in the Lord's church. We will hear people say, the people, the brethren. That's racist. Because what they're generally saying is, those who are like me, the color of my skin. That's wrong. It's wrong to be racist. I don't care who you are. And racism is not confined to one race of people. Is it racist to think of somebody from another country as, why, your people? And use that in a derogatory way? Yeah. This was not a slur against the Jews. But the original word here refers to age. And the American Standard and New King James accurately translate this so that we understand it today. Now, if you'd have lived in the time when the King James was written, you would have understood that's what it's saying. But in our modern, quote, modern age, I wonder how modern it is sometimes, we don't understand it that way. This lends thought to the idea that a certain age group was involved in this educational aspect, were chosen. Why? Oh yeah. As one commentator used to say, the young's head are full of mush. In other words, what was he saying? They're easily pliable. They can easily be, have you ever, I'll use this illustration. Back when Jenny and I used to make toys and we'd take them to the market and sell them, one little boy I was talking to, and we were talking about the toys and everything, and something was said about food, and I said, did you see that field down the road? Do you see those big white things rolled up out in the field? You know what I'm talking about, those big rolls of hay, and they put them in, cover them up in white to make them stay. I said, do you know what those are? And he said, what? I said, that's a marshmallow farm. And I had that little boy believing that he could go down there and dip his hand into it and come out with marshmallow and eat it. Then I had to undo what I did. Well, that illustrates the point that little children can easily, if we keep at it, we can easily mold their little minds to believing something that is not anywhere near the truth if we so chose. And the same thing is true of young people, teenagers, even up into the early 20s. That's the people who are in college, who are having their minds molded by these professors to think some of the stupidest things that there are nowadays. And it's not that all these professors are bad. Don't misunderstand. But when they teach these kids and convince them that that baby inside a mother's womb is nothing but a lump of flesh and molecules and blah, 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 and not a baby, that's absolutely contrary to what God said about knowing Jeremiah in his mother's womb. When they convince them that, oh, if you want to be a girl, even though you're a boy, you can do it. No, they can't. Isn't it interesting that in the medical field, it is absolutely important for the medical community when you go in the emergency room to know what you were born as? Why? Because the medical treatment for a male is different than the medical treatment for a female. How do they get their minds so warped if they're not pliable? McQuiggan wrote, one man feared the Lord, Nebuchadnezzar, and the other feared Nebuchadnezzar's Lord. And that's an interesting way to think of the eunuch and Daniel.